Welcome or welcome back to my series on how to recruit for various verticals. So previously we talked about venture capital, which is what I work in, and today we're going to talk about product management, which I did a lot of interviews and process for, you as well. By the way, there's a primer video to all of this, which is just about like networking, interviews, small versus big companies generally. But this video is going to be digging deep into PMing, and Nick in particular is the expert on the process because...
Hello. I've been brought to talk about product management. I was previously a product manager intern and then became a full-time product manager over at Google. Also, just as a heads up, all of my opinions are my own. They do not represent the opinions of my current or former employers.
Anyways, getting right into it. Okay, so quickly, let's get grounded in what a PM actually does. If you already know, you can skip it, but essentially they are the voice of the user. So figuring out what is going to delight a user about a product, getting to conviction around that opinion, and then convincing a bunch of other people to share that opinion.
Great. And actually, when you say PM, there are many things that can start with PM at a company. They're all great roles, like program manager or project manager. But if you're trying to apply for product management roles, make sure you're actually applying to a product management role, different types of PM. And then as far as what a PM actually does, I think what you said is great. And essentially what you're doing is you're establishing scope and then trying to keep all the different shareholders like executing against that scope. Of what is the product, and then you're also building out the narrative. What is the story of the product? And tactically, the way that actually works is you write product requirements documents, or PRDs, and so these establish what is the scope and priority of the actual product, and then you also give presentations where you're trying to justify like why is this product this way, and you're doing this in front of like leadership or different shareholders in the product.
Okay, so the actual timeline for recruiting. Now, remember that there's a difference between big company APM programs and small startup PM programs/jobs, but we're primarily talking about the big company timeline. So if you want the internship or a full-time offer, you're going to need to recruit the year before in the fall, but really the summer, because applications usually open towards the end of August and then continue on through that semester. Now note, some of these applications are super short, like Facebook's is like 1 week or something like that, and they all open at different times. Some are rolling, some are not. So there are like websites you can find online that keeps track of all the dates, and you should keep track of the dates yourself.
Yep, that's totally fair. And something that you should consider with some of these programs, especially like Google's, where a lot of the full-time class is actually made up of like 50-50 the intern class from the year before. You might actually want to consider, if you're dead set on like a full-time role at something like Google in a product management program, then you actually want to take a look at like recruiting for the internship programs the year before. And as far as how you actually do the recruiting goes, first you're going to submit a resume, and so you're going to submit that at their portal, online, whatever. And then you'll hear back and get a phone screen. And then after that phone screen, you will get both a written assignment as well as schedule your on-site interviews. Then you'll go do your on-site interviews, and there might be a follow-up interview, but mostly it's just the on-site interviews, and then you're done. Those on-site interviews can consist of behavioral questions, technical questions, as well as product questions, of course.
Which we are going to go through in the section on interviews. So listing out some common programs. Now note, recruiting APM has become actually so popular that there are entire websites dedicated to tracking various companies' APM programs, whether they are active, what the due date is, etc. So you would just Google that for the most up-to-date information. But we're going to talk about 3 of the OGs, or some of the most popular ones, which are Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. But note, like Coinbase, Instacart, Twitter, Atlassian, IBM, Walmart, blah, 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 often, or now all do have product programs as well.
So I love being able to talk about the Google APM program as an ex-Google APM myself. The Google APM program is structured as kind of a 2-year rotational program. Each rotation is about a year long, and you end up having all these other fun extracurricular activities. You get to go on all these trips, you meet up with all the other APMs. It's very collegiate. The size of the program is only 45 people, so you end up getting to know most of them pretty well. I consider some of the Google APMs some of my closest friends, so it's an awesome program as far as the people go. And then the kind of quirk of Google APM program is they generally tend to look for technical people. Most of us had some sort of CS degree, minor, background, etc. The other common program that people will talk about is Facebook's RPM program, which stands for Rotational Product Manager. Facebook's RPM program is structured also rotationally, but it's 18 months, so it's a little shorter, and it has 3 rotations. So you get to see a little bit more of the business as far as breadth go. breadth goes. It is also a very collegiate program. You end up, I believe, being very close to all of the other RPMs. I think they all really enjoy each other's company. The actual size of the RPM program is on the order of like tens of people. I actually don't know the exact number, but it's also small. And the kind of quirk of RPM program is that it tends to be a little bit more business oriented, and they actually pride themselves on not requiring a strict technical background in order to join. So it's also very cool.
Okay, and lastly, we're going to talk about Microsoft. Now, Microsoft's PM program is actually not a program. You essentially just get hired to be a PM at an entry level, just like many of their other jobs. In terms of size, I think it's hundreds, if not thousands of people. Like the way that they hire lots of software engineers, they also hire lots of PMs. Now, the quirk here is that this is program management most of the time and not product management, meaning you're doing a lot more execution, ops, timeline stuff versus just product stuff. So now we're going to go over how to think about various parts of your resume, which include education, your experiences, as well as projects, etc., or extracurriculars. Now, I'm going to do a whole video about how to write a good resume because it is very hard, but 2 important tips are go for cleanliness/clarity, ironic, versus comprehensiveness, aka you'd rather have your resume be readable than have absolutely everything you've ever done because people scan it in literally like 2 seconds. Also, don't be creative when it comes to the formatting because they go through an applicant tracking system for these big companies because they get tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of applicants, meaning that if you do creative things with formatting such as including images or doing crazy fonts or saving your resume as an image versus PDF or doc, this software is not going to be able to scrape for the things that they're looking for and you'll just be auto-rejected. So those are just a couple things to note. In terms of education, aka what do people study, quite frankly, I think most PMs have a computer science degree in some way, in the sense that it's a major or a minor, or they studied something adjacent to computer science like pure math or data science or something like that. A very common question that people get is, do you have to be technical to be a PM?
That is indeed a very common question. I get it all the time. So I philosophically believe that PMs should be technical. Now, that's very scary sounding, but I don't mean that you should be a great programmer or know even really how to code. I just mean that you should have a love of technology and you should know a lot of how technology works to the point that you can estimate what's possible so that you can scope out a good product so that you can understand and interface with engineers. To be clear, I don't believe you technically need to be technical because I believe to get the job, you can kind of come from any background, and if you can kind of figure it out, you'll be able to get the job. I do think, though, that at a company like Google, where it is very engineering first, if you are not technical, I do think that you will make your life harder on yourself.
Yeah. The exception is the Facebook RPM program, as we said above, but by and large, it's about getting the respect of your engineers and being able to understand the world from their lens.
Yep.
Okay, so going on to work experience. Quite frankly, if we're being really honest here, people who get full-time product jobs tend to have experience as software engineers or in product itself. This is not always true. So for example, I did software engineering as well as business roles. Nick did software engineering as well as research roles. So you can come from a lot of places, but that tends to be a similarity.
Yeah. As Mary mentioned, my background was actually essentially software engineering and some biotech research. And then I ended up going into product. I do think that when you're trying to get into a product management role, there's really 2 things that matter. One is being outcome driven and one is being data driven. So essentially in a product role, your job is to get everyone to align with you on some set of opinions on a product and then actually do it, get it to be done. And so if you are in a role where you are able to highlight the things that you're accomplishing, the outcomes that are happening because of you, or the data that you're using to either tell a story or data that is showing up as a result of your product, your metrics essentially, those are the 2 key skills that are really kind of showing up in product resume screens. So if you can highlight that in your experience, whether it's a business role, whether it's a non-technical product that you're building, whether it's just some sort of leadership role or other thing that you're doing, highlight those things. That's really what matters here. Cool. So the last thing that we're going to talk about in resumes is projects and extracurriculars. I think there's kind of 3 main categories of these. There's things that you can build, things that you can lead, and then entrepreneurial stuff that you can do. So stuff that you can build, building anything is actually quite useful, and most importantly that it gets in front of some sort of user. You want people actually using the things you're building. Even better if they'll pay you for it, but that's more of a nice to have. So in my case, I actually had built a VPN product.
As a side project.
As a side project, just kind of amount of time. It ended up being used by about I don't know, like 50 to 80 people.
Which is like a lot, but it didn't need to be.
It's just, it was really nice, and I got a lot of experience actually like building something from an idea I had to getting it in front of an actual person. And so I talked about that a lot when people asked in interviews. And then, of course, the other category, or one of the other categories you can do, is you can be a leader somewhere. So often this is through clubs, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a team, it could be whatever. In my case, I ended up actually being co-founder and president of a college cyber defense competition team and club. And I spent countless hours over 4 years just working a ton on that club and trying to make it as successful as I could. So whenever someone asked, I was able to tell them all sorts of stories and experiences that I had leading and running this club. And I felt that was actually pretty useful in that process.
I think it's a lot better that you had dedicated so much time to one thing versus being mediocre or sort of participating at 20 things.
Yeah, 100%.
Anyways, the third category I'd say is entrepreneurial. So whether that's you're working at a startup or you started something on your own, it's the same skill set of driving towards an outcome with a team. So for example, when I was in college, I helped run a nonprofit that built legal tech to help immigrants. And that's a great example of a team coming together to build technology to help users, which actually has obviously a lot of overlap with product and is something you can speak to. Yeah. Okay, so when it actually comes down to the PM interview, we're going to talk about 6 parts of this, which is the phone screen / behavioral, written assignment, product design questions, business strategy questions, estimation questions, as well as technical questions. Now, you're going to hate me for this, but we're actually going to do it in the next video, and that's because if we were to combine all this stuff with examples, it's going to be more than an hour long, and no one wants to watch that. So that is coming up. So now we are talking about quote unquote my strategy, which is the part of this series where I say, if I was to do it again and I knew that I want to be a product manager, how would I have done it throughout college? So in terms of freshman and sophomore year, I'm going to start by saying in terms of freshman year, if you have some amount of privilege, what I mean by that is you feel like you have some amount of safety net, I would, instead of doing the corporate thing, do something crazy. I try to explore as much as you can in college because you will have the rest of your life to be an employee. There's a short period of time where it's very socially acceptable to just explore. Freshman year should definitely be that. But when it comes to sophomore and junior years, there are more programs that are targeted towards that group that are professional. And quite frankly, there are a lot of feeder programs that go into these PM roles. So for example, Google AP or any of the big tech SWE roles tend to be feeders into the big tech PM roles, unsurprisingly. Another random tip I would say, it's not really a tip, but it's just something to note. If you have more experience, it can help your application or it can give an edge to your application. For example, if you take a gap year and you do another internship, or if you do a winter internship, or if you take a gap semester and have another kind of life experience or work experience, because you are applying with other people in the same peer group as you, if you have one more experience than them, that often is actually a little bit of an edge. That's not a good reason to take a gap year, but I'm just saying that's true. And then also, finally, I would have followed the extracurricular tips we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And then once you get into kind of junior, senior year, things get a little bit more serious. You have an eye for what are you actually going to be doing after you leave school. So junior year and senior year, the same kind of tips apply, but essentially your goal is practice, and you're really just trying to get as much volume as you can. What you kind of start with is you're just applying to as many of these programs as you can. So you're just trying to get your job, your resume, in front of as many of these companies as you can.
Because these programs are small, so you want that probability spread across.
There is a piece of a numbers game.
Yeah.
Even if you're hard to set on one of them, make sure you're applying to as many of them as you can. Remember that they have different due dates, kind of different rolling periods. A lot of them you want to apply as early as possible. Some of them are rolling, so you want to actually get a resume in as quickly as you can. Then, once you have enough reps on kind of applications, make sure that you're also trying to get as many referrals as possible. So referrals are where someone who actually currently works at that company says, hey, this is a great person that I know. I would like to recommend them for that role. Try and get as many referrals as you can, but keep in mind that quality does matter. So if you have someone who can say this person was in the top 95 percentile of people I've ever worked with, that is more useful than it's oh, I vaguely know this person, they asked for a referral. So that's important to keep in mind, but do note that having a referral is better than no referral, especially for getting past that initial resume screen. And then once you actually have your applications, you've referred, then it's going to be interview time, and you want to make sure you're getting as much interview practice as possible. So interview practice, that means you're either recording yourself and then looking at it, or practicing with friends or people who actually have the role that you're practicing to try and get. So interview practice, treat it like the real thing, get as many of them as possible. When you're practicing with friends, try and select for friends that kind of have the skill that you're after and have them evaluate you only on that skill. Do not do general interview practice. It's kind of a waste of everyone's time. You're much better off getting practice with like a very technical friend, have them ask you technical questions. Product friend who's really good at designing things, have them ask you product design questions. It will just make the whole thing a little bit more focused and honestly, I think a little bit more fun. And then, of course, what you're actually trying to do is get all the way through this process, get to the offer stage where you are actually receiving an offer from the company. Try and get through that with as many companies as possible. And the reason for this is actually like, yes, you can kind of like leverage and try and get a better offer or whatever, but that's not really the actual point. The real point is, one, you'll get more practice, but two, you are also going to be remembered by those systems. So all of these tech companies, they're going to track every application you've ever submitted. They do a really good job of it, and they use that to inform later decisions. So when you have a process where you got all the way to the offer stage, they essentially then believe like, oh, we would have hired this person at some point in time. That is a very useful signal if you ever want to apply to one of those companies later. So do try and get all the way through that process. Be respectful and kind-hearted whenever you're doing this, of course.
Also, even if it's a company you might not be interested in, you probably will get a lot of good practice from doing that interview, and you might turn out to be really interested in that company.
I'm not gonna lie, a lot of my friends have discovered that they actually ended up in the role that was perfect for them, even though they didn't go into it thinking they wanted to join that company. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Nick, for joining this video. And as a reminder, I'm going to link all of the relevant other videos in this recruiting / how to get a job series below. And let me know if you have any questions, and like and subscribe, that whole spiel.